India is ignoring Western sanctions and buying Russian oil at a discount. Reuters says the country has bought at least 13 million barrels of Russian crude oil since late February. It only bought 16 million in the whole of last year. Now, India reports 85% of its crude oil. Ravi Agrawal is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, and he was CNN's bureau chief in Delhi, but he joins me now. I guess, look, they can't, I suppose, be blamed in a sense if they're going to get their oil on the cheap. But they are not making any friends, if you like, in their studied neutrality is likely to only inflame matters worse.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Richard. It is studied neutrality. India is yet to condemn Russia by name. It's abstained at the United Nations every single time it could do so. But, you know, the thing to keep in mind about the oil purchases is that India actually gets very little of its crude from Russia, just about 1 to 2% of its total amount. India, of course, is a net importer, so it needs to import about 75% of its needs. So it needs cheap oil. Obviously, with inflation, higher crude prices, that impacts India badly. So where they can find a deal, they will find a deal. At least that's what they will say. But I think where India has sort of upset the West more, where it has weathered more criticism, is the fact that it is the world's largest democracy. And I think countries like the United States have been expecting it or hoping that India would be a little bit tougher on Russia, at least rhetorically. I think that's where it probably hurts more, rather than the very small numbers we're talking about when it comes to crude purchases.
Right now, let's look at what the Prime Minister said recently when the Foreign Minister of Russia was there. The Prime Minister says India is on the side of peace. Well, I mean, I don't think anybody will disagree with that. But the lily-livered language that India has used, will there be at least embarrassed faces as the Butcher genocide becomes ever clearer?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the recent atrocities that are emerging just add ever more pressure on New Delhi, and I think it's going to get harder and harder for it to continue the study neutrality, as you call it, because the images are images that Indians are seeing as well. I think there will be some domestic pressure at home. But all of that said, what Indian diplomats have been saying recently, as they have to a whole troop of foreign ministers who've been in New Delhi over the last few weeks, is that, you know, Indians in general are more likely to care about what's going on in Afghanistan next door, which, let's not forget, also has a humanitarian disaster on its hands, and Ukraine is Europe's problem. This is what the Indian foreign minister has been saying, citing Indian people. So that might be their way of sort of distancing themselves a little bit. But this is a stance that is going to be harder and harder to continue, as you say.
Ravi, you're the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, so I make no apologies for just sort of moving around the world as we do. Viktor Orban got re-elected last night, 4th term, and then made some extraordinary comments, even by Orban's standing, claiming Zelensky is part of the opposition. Now, that's not going to go down very well in Brussels, which, of course, is also part of the opposition in his view. What's he on about here? What's the end game for Orban now he's been re-elected?
Well, I mean, for starters, he's just been re-elected despite a track record of saying all of these things. So in a sense, this says a lot about Hungary as well. But then, you know, the election itself was not free and fair. And Orban has long been, you know, an autocratic leader who has looked to, instead of to the West, he's looked to the East for inspiration. And so in a sense, none of this is surprising. But in as much as the last few years has become, you know, this sort of accelerated aligning of democracies against autocracies, and we're seeing those lines get ever more deepened, Orban is sort of putting his line in the sand and making clear where he stands, which for Hungary is very troubling.
If there's a part of the world that Ravi can't give us insight on, we've yet to find it. Good to see you, sir. Thank you. Ravi joining us. Now,